Welcome, welcome. Automated charm testing and heads. Yeah. So one of the things we discussed at a sprint with a couple of us, George and Kapil, Gustavo, myself, and Mark Mims last week, was the need to effectively take care of whatever we can automate in testing for charm authors. We need to do that. And because it's such a big, complex system, that the interaction of charms, we want to make sure that we're doing a continuous integration type of story. So we came up with a plan. It's pretty sound. It's going to require some development of some of the smart test runner, but we're going to leverage some existing things, whether it's probably the waterfall thing, and or maybe Jenkins, or maybe both. We don't know exactly yet, but we're not going to choose the implementation details. We just want to make sure that there's some other testing resources that have been made around charms, so we want to make sure we incorporate them or deprecate them and bring them into this system. So I should mirror.
And incorporate them very tightly into the charm submission process too.
Yeah, so...
Can I have a nice gated truck? Oh, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, we can gate, but I mean, not on PPAs, but yeah.
Is this the right approach outlined though? I mean, so the idea is that what we want to be able to model is an interface that can apply against everything that says it has that interface.
You just said mock?
Yeah.
And
Not
we
mock,
decided we
but
don't want to mock.
It's
So we
not
could discuss
mock,
mock.
it's exercise. Implement something that exercises that interface.
Absolutely.
Everything that says it doesn't, that doesn't live in the charm. That is, we have an implementation of something that triggers every interface that's been agreed to.
So the idea is that we would actually be testing the graph, but we would be testing it instead of against actual things.
We don't need to test any graph, right? We test each charm independently by exercising all the interfaces they claim.
But they're
to.
fundamentally
That's
connected.
exactly what we're talking about.
But it doesn't live in the, like, so everything that implements website has to carry the same test script?
No.
Whereas I'm saying we would have the website test package, which exercises anything that claims to implement.
So that is somewhat of a mocking approach, in that you're assuming that you have control of one side. What we're actually proposing to do is say, test relating every way that you claim to be able to relate in your metadata. So if you say you provide website, let's test everything that requires website and run its tests after that relation. We're going to test the entire graph of possible dependencies.
So I'm picturing these like unit tests for charms, and you're picturing them as
Functional tests.
functional tests over a.
It basically integration. I mean, we want to test the end-to-end. Does
But
it do what we
integration
think it should
shouldn't
do?
be sound if it implements the interface. And by doing this, we've effectively documented the interfaces in a verifiable
I
way.
think Gustavo has something to say to this point.
So let's see some value to our science.
So, what we have in the screen now is an implementation suggestion, and at least I have some difficulties like designing the pressure. Can we move instead into a requirements mode where we try to capture what's the goals of what we're trying to do, so that this is going to be easier to agree upon and
Yeah, let's
have
scope
like
this
a
for
great-
1204 too, so we don't get...
But we can scope later. I think.
Right.
Scoping, we can sit down and try to see how much we can do.
Okay, okay.
Right. But I think can we get into what's the outcome of whatever testing system we come up with? What's the outcome of it?
There's lots of dangers that we're trying to avoid, right?
Right.
Charms are loose.
But a charm should be tested against,
Trusted.
we should be verifiable that it does, that its service it works, and more importantly, that when it is tested, that its relations work against other things. So if one of them changes, that if there's breakage against other things that use that same interface, it's detectable.
Okay, that sounds like we're
Well, something that Ben had brought up earlier that I think is relatively useful is that
Yes.
thank God. The documentation of the interfaces. Having a means to document it in code in a functional means. Solved either way. I don't even care functional or mock, but I think it's a very useful requirement to have come out.
Documented interfaces. Okay.
So the problem is you will have some charms which provide interfaces that are not used by other charms, which are not only intended to applications. So if you only internally check interfaces, you will need some.
Yeah, interfaces are named conventions. They're not first-class entities.
No enforcement.
So have a mechanism to document and to test the interface. Sounds like an interesting idea.
What are some conventions that are emerging about how interfaces are
Well,
used? And,
yeah,
in some
I mean-
ways, patterns that we could actually put some testing on?
Having documentation and testing on interfaces would be very good because right now it is very much a convention that has to sort of be intersected against the name.
Maybe there's a simple sort of get set type pattern that you
You're walking to implementation.
could. Yeah.
The requirement that I'm,
What's the requirement in this terms?
So, like, I think the requirement would be to know, to talk to a charm, what are the names of the relation, not relation,
The relation, yeah.
the relations, what are the relations that do I need, which one are optional, which one are mandatory.
Yeah, but I guess that's,
It's more about how do I implement an
yeah,
interface, I think.
it sounds like we're still going around the first point there. Detect breakage of a charm related to an interface. So it's not clear how we're going to do it, but it sounds
Well-
like, does anyone want to complement that with additional information?
Has anyone found interfaces breaking in practice?
No.
That would be nice.
It's been too
They're-
small.
They're so much.
sample size is small enough, we can
Yeah.
pretty much keep it in our heads.
I don't know if this is right in line. If it's not, tell me, back off on this. But in doing larger functional testing, especially with asynchronous systems, it's often very, very useful to have a mechanism where you can get an event from the system under test that you can then check as opposed to just pulling the crap out of it.
Yeah, a barrier.
So that as a requirement would be very pleasant to see.
Being push-based, not pull-based, basically.
Yeah.
Get told.
So you
that-
can ask for
so-
status, but you can also get told, hey, something's
Sounds good.
changed, here's the state of the union, whatever.
Sounds
The
good.
equivalent of sneaking a look in the message queue, or, I mean, I don't know your guts,
Is
right?
that-
So
An optimization?
Tell authors about breakages, I guess, something like that.
it's a little bit of an optimization, but it also makes doing a lot of large-scale functional testing much more effective over the long term.
Yeah.
Indeed.
A charm can also break just because of install, right?
So
Independent of.
Well, how do we capture that? I mean,
What-
there, how do we capture what was just said?
I want to make sure that we're all agreed that we want to detect the breakage of a charm related to an interface, because we kind of jumped again.
I think
That
that's-
is an absolute requirement. We need to be able to detect not only that, but we want to have a good idea of what change broke the relationship
Yes.
between these two charms.
Absolutely.
Right, and can capture this idea as well, please.
But I think there was one case that comes to mind. It was the use of MySQL example. I don't know if it's been fixed, but the fact that the database name was dependent on a property, on a setting that could go and see the characterization, whatever it was. That comes to mind.
Well, database name was based on the service name, but the service name wasn't necessarily a proper database name.
Yeah, in general, that sort of thing.
Indeed.
But that's fixable without breakage on the other side, though.
It's
It's
just.
an encoding as you create the database name.
No, there was also, I think, MySQL was copied and created and turned into Postgres, and like dashes didn't work for usernames or something. You kind of want to know that right away. Deploy and relate. Oops,
Yeah.
that doesn't work. Rather than waiting for the first person to try. But that we're saying the same thing. Detect the breakage and identify the actual charm, a change that broke
Yes.
that relationship.
Which change broke that graph against it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying relationship.
Same thing.
It's kind of, when I say the relationship, I mean the graph, definitely. Because it's important to note that you can't just test the two sides of a relationship. If one of the other sides has requirements to be in a runnable state, you actually have to find the whole graph of all possibilities. Essentially, if I want to test HA proxy, I'm going to actually end up testing basically everything, because HA proxy implements HTTP, and everything is providing HTTP, so everything is going to be tested. Well, then everything is going to test all the MySQL providers and every other provider of every other interface, essentially. So the graph gets really big, but that's okay. We can actually calculate the graph and scale the testing infrastructure up to meet demand.
It seems good, but I don't know if it's necessary. I mean, if you bind the implementation of this interface to each of its interfaces and send the messages that it's supposed to get in a controlled pattern.
It's not just about the messages. It's about the service being in a state based on the messages. So when when MySQL sends back hostname and database and username and password,
The only interaction it has.
It's through the interface, and if you test that interface, you don't necessarily need to test the graph. It's a valid point. Just the interface itself isn't.
sorry, I didn't
You have
understand.
communication at the message level, in ensemble, but you have communication at the MySQL level. If you only move the relationship, you won't pass out the communication at the MySQL.
And there may
Saying
be
it's more implied when you place than just setting attributes. There's also other.
there may be additional communication that needs to happen after out-of-band communication that Juju's unaware of has happened. So essentially, I give you something that you can then connect back to me and introspect me and change me, and then the config channel comes back with, okay, reload the daemon or something that can't happen through that out-of-band controls now.
So that first point you say detect functional breakage.
I think breakage.
Yeah, I mean, if we're testing functionally, but if we were testing that way, that line would be, it would work for that line, except it wouldn't
I
necessarily.
don't really understand the difference I mean, I understand it is wildly different, the graph isn't needed, but I don't understand how it's actually effective to not test all the other sides of it for real.
Because if a test is independent, if the interface test is, if the interface is a first-class entity, and it is effectively a spec and test against the interface, then it is known that if anything breaks that interface. That's the point, that's how the graph interconnects. And if you test the interconnection,
And how is that not the mock approach?
it is effectively the mock approach.
Okay, then we discussed the
did.
weaknesses of that.
We did.
With a system that is so loosely coupled like Juju.
Yeah.
Like, there's weaknesses inherent in mock.
There's
general that you
additional
find.
value in that, because one of the first questions when you're looking at something and how do I use something is, how do I implement this interface? And capturing that as a first-class entity has additional value.
Agreed.
Being able to test it against multiple things that claim to implement it is not something that this approach necessarily gives us. I mean, we can simulate it by building a different graph with components, but
We can basically test the whole possible graph.
everything that could possibly ever intersect,
Yeah.
logical or not.
And likely, I mean, there will be some
Your process
interfaces.
confused that, for example.
There will be some interfaces that are absolutely expensive to change, and we may blacklist them, like HTTP that becomes ubiquitous. We may just run that in a continuous loop because and deal with the fact that we can't identify the change. I think that's okay. Most of the graphs will be fairly manageable. Most of them will be 4 or 5 levels deep at the most.
Well, okay.
That's like the biggest one that I can think of.
Right, but the common cue is that we test N1, we instantiate the graph just for fulfilling requirements. We're still testing that one and N1 again, and depth 1 against that change.
Jim, you had
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think the aspect of marking out one-sided interface, that's clearly has all these objections, as we just discussed. But it might be nice to at least assert what the expected behavior is in terms of the communication occurring on that interface.
Yeah, it's the kind of mock approach. I think it's fine. You don't have to roll out things right now, right? I think both are good ideas, and maybe we should do both.
It was easier and lighter way. So to test them all.
Both have good advantages on their sides.
James?
So I just think about the kind of test cycle I go through when I'm doing charm development. So for the last few I've done, I've tested against multiple providers because they do behave slightly differently, and I want to make sure my charm works with as many as possible, so that when someone spins it up on OpenStack, it works as well as it does on EC2. We're going to try and cover that element as well.
Yeah, that's a requirement. We may not satisfy it in the first iteration, but I think that should be a requirement.
How can we work that?
So testing against multiple providers. Yeah. So
run
Verify
plus
provider neutrality.
that also gives the charm developers who don't necessarily have access to all those environments some way they can submit their charm for QA.
I think somehow it's more the test of Juju than the test of the charm, because Juju is supposedly an abstraction of all the providers. So if that breaks all the providers and goes to another, then all we need to have something.
Yeah, there can be charms, we don't want them, but there are charm-specific services that can be exposed.
You can have poorly behaved.
Exposed services.
But providers mean
EC2
We've had
would
poorly
say-
behaved charms in the past.
Okay.
Querying the EC2 metadata service,
That makes
and that's what you want to detect.
Okay.
Is no, use unit get
Yeah.
there.
So I want to know if I pull that down and run that in my local dev env, it's going to work.
then what's
Definitely.
did you intend to say about like the providers as in EC2 and OpenStack, or more as in all the charms that provide against all the charms that are required?
No, I do providers as in how my EC2 OpenStack.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It might be also useful to do things like people add relation, remove relation, re-add the relation again to check and
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, so we need to be able to
Verify item potency.
Yeah, we need to be able to have a flexible way of doing scenarios. Like, because we need to be able to dig into, well, yeah, item potency, verifying item potency definitely, but also even more than that, just being able to write out failure scenarios. I mean,
But it's
I was thinking of one in particular where I found an issue, which was the Cassandra charm. In that if you try and run that on the local LXC provider, pre the change I made to it, it doesn't work. Because you spin 4 instances and they all try and take every bit of memory in the system because it's running on your desk.
Because that's what the standard does. That actually is a valid memcache. There was an init script on the platform before that would do exactly that.
Yeah.
We would say, how much memory do we have? Take 75% of it.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Project memory stat is not actually accurate on LXC. It doesn't take into account memory limits. So, yeah, now there's an interesting thing that we didn't cover when we were talking privately, which is peer relations.
Yeah.
Is 2 enough? Because in Ceph it's not. Ceph, a 2-node Ceph cluster is broken. You have to have 1 or 3. Because of the leader election is naive, essentially. So when there are 2, you have a split brain. You can have it in that state, but you have to move to 3 to have it usable.
We discussed this in terms of minutes with numbers.
I'm sorry?
I mean, we discussed this in terms of how many units we specify.
But I think the context is testing, right?
Yeah, in testing.
It could use that type of information for the test purpose.
But I think functional tests, you can have functional tests with custom scripts. You can do whatever is suitable for.
So you could add
the
unit
charm
in the functional
at
test.
the end, yeah.
Okay, yeah, then
just
that's...
feel like part of driving the test scenario language should be
It's the
using
test.
the command line effectively and capturing that.
Right.
Okay,
That's,
so,
can you show in the screen the of tests, just to give an idea, the
yeah,
EC2 metadata run.sh?
I don't know what that is.
It's go to Juju or code.launchpad.net/Juju/ftests.
Juju/ftests.
Should do something, right?
Then browse.
Browse the code.
Click on code, yeah.
Sorry, a little slow there.
Tests. EC2 WordPress. Run the SSH. So this is a real functional test that will run continuously against trunk. So I hope we have something like that for every charm. Exercises the feature of the charm itself.
Right, so the implementation that we had suggested, which is the thing below all these requirements, was that it would essentially prepare a graph and then run a test like this.
Yeah, but so I think preparing a graph is this is preparing a graph. Right? You don't have to do that in a magic way. You can actually, whatever is suitable for the charm can be done in that
So,
file.
when I wrote the OpenStack testing stuff, I had looked at this as well, and I looked at what Adam had done. So what I'm preparing there is a graph that I know that we need to test. So it seems to be crossover between that and what I think we're trying to get out of the charm testing, which is the kind of automated.
Please run
I don't want to
that
have to
error.
write one of these when I submit a charm necessarily. I think that I want to test this specific graph as a different type of test.
Indeed, and I think actually we can back away from the magic graph detector and just say that, yeah, when you are writing a test, when creating a charm, you should be thinking of the full use case for it and write that test for that charm and that interface.
Start there.
So something exactly like this. So this one actually exercises the MySQL interface of WordPress, essentially. And it also could be in the WordPress charm exercising the other side of that MySQL interface.
Yeah.
And the idea would be that I'd be comfortable with that. Forget the magic graph. Just whenever this charm changes, we run all of its tests. And that would give us a massive amount of coverage over what we have now, which is done.
But
Infinite, actually.
so how do you feel, James? James has done some interesting testing ideas, which is not what I had in mind. So it's interesting to get a different view of the problem.
So I think what Tim just described there is fine on a relatively simple charm set like WordPress MySQL. I'm not sure how well that works when you start. I keep coming back to the OpenStack example because it is by far and away the most complicated thing we do with Juju times. Trying to express that in something that's charm-centric, the test case for it is quite different. I'm not saying we have to address that because we could address that in a different way. It'd be nice if we could. So if you look at some of the charms involved there, then if I change Nova Compute, for example, Nova Compute has context with other charms, but should I encapsulate the kind of functional system test in Nova Compute, or should that be something that sits outside any of those things?
So
and if any of those things change, I run this test with against
really, what Nova Compute has is a set of provides and requirements. And what you would want to do is have functional tests that make sense for all of those. Not for the entire stack, even though they may end up exercising it. You want to be able to know that that place in the graph has changed, essentially. So Nova Compute sits at a certain spot in the entire deployment graph of OpenStack.
So we deploy that graph and run the test.
So it does. No, the test. We're talking about in the scenario where we're just embedding these tests and just running them on change of this chart. We would essentially have the OpenStack test that tests the whole graph.
Yeah, but I think James is basically stating from experience the same thing I stated in our session, which is when you have a graph, you want to deploy the graph to see if it's working together, right? And in those cases, it sounds awkward to be having that in a specific charm.
Essentially, you would duplicate the test.
The location for that test is interesting because the location of that test is the stack, is the thing that describes the composite.
Absolutely. Yeah.
This is basically a stack right here.
And so maybe while we don't have stacks, we can have them externally in some server that has a waterfall view so that you can refer to the test, something like that, right? And once we put, which I hope is not too far away, once we put stacks into the picture, we introduce the test into the stack itself. And
so that
would be the place to put it. I agree.
That is pretty much what I've done today. I have a very simple framework, and I have the concept of defining a test for a stack. And because I can't define a stack, I actually define how I have a deploy hook that deploys a stack, and then I have a test hook that runs a set of tests against them. And I happen to have implemented that with another charm at the moment. I don't think that's the right way forward. I think it should be a functional test against that
I
stack.
would be super happy if we had essentially a Launchpad directory, whether it's under Juju as another series, like F-tests, maybe it's part of F-tests. I feel like it's more related to the charm store, but essentially charm tests that was just a list of tests that run. I wonder though, do we run them on every change to every charm of the charm store? Like that's where the selection seems like.
I think we can have rules that depend on the status of the charm and how much we care about it. And ideally, I would like to run on every single change. I think the benefit of that seems to outweigh the cost. But I don't have data to prove that or anything. So.
Right.
We need to feed the output back to the charms though, because the question, the answer is this charm good?
Right.
And
Did
can I
this
pull
charm
this
break
charm
something?
and is it working?
We talked about the requirement. We want to identify the change that broke the relationship.
Yeah.
And
So somehow
It's also just not about the charm, because it can also scan on the Ubuntu package, which can
absolutely.
totally different
We should be running these out of band, not just on charm changes, daily.
But
Running
that's
them.
fine, we
Our
can
next milestone.
specify stacks in such a way right now for tests that
You can attack that case by running the test that was working there.
But you don't necessarily know, you're not feeding on the package queue, you're feeding on the change queue for the charm.
We could feed on the package.
So what I think that you probably need to have the schedule run whatever the charms change or not, just to make sure.
Like, I mean, we could go every milestone in Ubuntu development.
Agreed.
Like, and then that would cover even the ones outside of Ubuntu development. That's kind of,
Yeah.
every 3 weeks or so, we just run them all.
To be honest, having such a fantastic test suite in place, deciding when to run them is
Yeah, as often as possible.
a critical problem.
Yeah.
So I think one key challenge we do need to address with this piece of work is about saying, okay, so I'm going to deploy this stack and test it, because that's how we test this set of charms. How do I know what's gone wrong? So how do I dig into the detail? Do I know if it's an install failure because someone's changed a package and it's broken? How do I know that my charm change is actually because of this?
Yeah.
So getting good
Logging.
and as much data collation as possible from that stack is really
So I really wish Monty and Jim from OpenStack were in here.
What do you want to know?
To run and find them. What's that?
They've been working on testing, so.
Yeah, well, and they have
working on it.
they have what you just talked about down to a science, and that they leave whatever broke running and essentially tell the developer, or at least, I don't know if this is what they're doing, or they want to do
They
that.
want to.
That's
Yeah.
what they want to do. Right now, they're collecting a whole bunch of logs where we have a predefined set of those logs.
And they just dump them
Subject
to you.
gets resolved.
so you mark any charm as failed.
But you can see where it would be pretty powerful to be able to, as these tests run, leave the instance that failed running.
It's assuming that we have someone who's getting, like, we're not leaving them burning for
For
months.
24 hours.
Yeah, okay. 24
I
hours,
mean,
yeah. Sorry.
that's a welcome cost. You have 24 hours. If you get the email, you log in, you have access to the thing that broke.
If you're doing
You
that
don't have
for
to keep
inside
rerunning
Canonical,
this.
that's going to be lovely. But if you're doing that for someone who's not inside Canonical, there's a problem with that. And that is, when Monty and Jim run those tests, they're behind a rack-space firewall that I don't have access to. So leaving it running for me doesn't do me any good.
Well, if we do it on EC2, we can just import ID and give access to
Sure, but I'm.
I think though, I see your point that because
$2 per error.
Because we have effectively 4 target provider environments, and we have the 2 EC2 supports of OpenStack and EC2 itself, and local and Orchestra. Hopefully, we'll be able to test these things in Orchestra. That's going to be really hard to make
It's just
it
going
work.
to be a little.
It'd be much better to focus on getting artifacts to the changeover groups.
We have a
That's
notion
actually-
of which things are sort of blessed or not, and we bless things that have these criteria and they get peer reviewed, but nothing else should we ever automate deployment test. Otherwise, we're just opening the door, and basically on our dime, we're going to be setting up for DDoS or whatever. Run this, it failed, leave it in a running state, it's still doing all the things. So you're paying for.
Yeah, I think should really agree. Should really collect
It's about the
data as much as possible and say, hey, here's what happened. And
Yeah, the
So we-
the tests that we do for
No,
OpenStack
I
have the
don't
same
think
kind of
we're running
issue,
it
because we
at
can, you know,
all.
if somebody runs a malicious test, they can
Right, but it's
sort
a
of
gate on
bypass.
trunk.
So does
It's a gate on the trunk of the busted format.
a failed test invalidate all of its component charms? And even if the charms have other tests that are passing currently?
It validates the one that had the change to it. It's recorded against the one that had the change to it.
If we can get to that granularity.
We know what we're executing the test
Okay.
case
Kind of
report.
depends how we're triggering these things.
Yeah, I guess we could tell where the test failed, what line the test.
Actually, that's an interesting point, because sometimes you might do changes to different terms, and you want to push them
But you
together.
know you should.
Ideally, they will run lockstep mode so that you only update one of them. In the test run, you only update one of them at a time. So that
Right, but you might fail one, and then, because you've made changes, you've upgraded, let's say, something, and if you ran it in isolation, one
You're
failed,
right,
but you want to do
you're right.
both.
yeah.
Well, so I really like the charm test stacks. I think this is great. We have some issues to work out with this. But before we, it's worth, our problem is not unique. What do other tools like this do for mocking? Right?
For testing,
Yeah.
they don't.
Similar things that I've seen, the essentially deploy my entire puppet infrastructure on this one machine and verify everything.
Yeah, but you need to an infrastructure.
Getting it from
It
outside
is,
the system
absolutely.
or something.
And as one of the things we're solving in Juju is no more siloed infrastructure specific implementation of things. So I don't know that it's useful to copy what they're doing, because we're not copying what they're doing in Charms
Yeah.
too.
Don't know. There are other tools where the service is only, where the mocking is really difficult because there's a lot of context.
Yeah, I do think the test that we looked at before is the kind of thing that we need. I could see wanting some tools to make this easier.
But
I
that's
think
later.
the interface, I would not like to roll it out. Yeah, right. The idea of testing the interfaces, it can as well coexist with actual functional tests.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a nice way to document an interface as well, to have something that, if you have a test that, very visually tells you what to expect from the interface, and you're able to apply that against a charm, it means that it's also good documentation for people to implement charms that depend on that interface as well. So this is, it may be tricky, but we should at least study it and think about the problem.
But it would be acceptable to do two solutions. The first one would just be charm test stacks.
Well, particularly the interface test.
Functional
would
test
live
sounds like an
independent.
easy win, an easy first win.
I mean, they're in two separate locations. It's not a,
Yeah.
it's only if you introduce a new interface effectively that we would need to have registration of interfaces effectively with those tests and documentation associated to the interface. It's something that is good.
So I'll jump ahead so we can validate one of our requirements. So we have interface tests for several of these interfaces, the stack tests. We stated the second requirement, identify the change, which breaks a given relationship. And currently, and I think for all time probably, the charms we want to test live as individual bizarre branches. So identifying the change that breaks it is actually a little bit tricky. And I wonder if we might defer that requirement in order to get something up that tests things out.
Well, even if there's an individual breakage against a change in effectively a stack of charms, then if we keep advancing the test runner, then it'll go green effectively at the end of the change run set.
I'm not sure how that,
Yeah.
it's been a long day, so take me through it again.
So say you change Nova and Swift, like, okay, so then you start running the Nova test, and okay, they're broken because you're not testing against that version of Swift, but then you do test against that version of Swift with that version of Nova because you've advanced the clock, and now they're green again.
Okay, so
So you will have some transient things, breakage.
I know exactly what you're saying. So you've got a consistency between two kind of proposed charm changes, which you need to test together. Now, I'm just rolling back to what Monty and James covered off earlier in the OpenStack stuff. Do they have a concept of essentially associating a set of proposed changes together? Or do they test those?
It's a topic.
Yeah. That's not guaranteed.
Yeah.
Because that's the concept you want to say,
It
let's
is.
take this as a set of charm changes.
It will be, I
And you're
think,
going to
quite
get
a
that
common
with
thing.
complex deployments. There's nothing you can do about it.
Right now, the gating in OpenStack is per project within OpenStack, and there's 5 core. There's no gating on a set of all of them working together, and any lockstep mechanism that we've solved yet for how to make them all, basically force that they're all still working together. Usually that's the fist fight that happens about
Well,
that
I mean,
phase 4.
So we're not getting trunk per se. I mean, we could, but effectively these are post things, so we can basically let them go through it and wait, verify that the graph goes green. Otherwise, we know that there's a failure.
This
So
is
we can basically say,
feedback.
is there something? Is there other changes in the queue? And if they're not, then clearly this is already this is broken.
Did you asked what's that in the notes? That's you, right?
Well, that
Yellow.
assumes the queue is
Change.
on.
What, the Garrett topics? Essentially, it's just grouping of changes across different branches.
But
That's done by
like I said,
hand.
I could see requirement for that to make that easier for people to understand why things are broken and to batch a set of changes up. I mean, we don't have to do that straight away, but I think it'd be a nice long
Sounds interesting. In any case, if we have, I think we need some kind of association as well between, stacks will be the final way, right? But we should have some association between the dependent charms and their functional tests. So this is already going in that direction as well, right? Because then you know that when any of those charms change, you should be running that functional test over there to make sure that the stack as a whole continues to work.
I mean, isn't the relation graph that already?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily, because the functional test, you may be testing, it may depend on, well, maybe it is. The problem is that it's hard to get working stacks against. No, I don't think it is actually. I don't think it is. When you have functional test, you have you have charm names in that functional test. You cannot build the charm names out of the relationships.
So we had a discussion about this last week about the fact that we would effectively dynamically supply those term names against the other things that implement the interface.
Imagine
that.
We could.
But that's huge combinatorial explosion. It's we're not gonna be able to do that in practice. Not for all end to end. It's like multiply 10.
HA proxy should work against all HTTP servers.
Yeah, which means nature proxies now.
For promulgated terms, currently, it would work.
Yeah, well, actually, we talked about circular circular dependencies wouldn't be,
Yeah.
they would just say, oh, circular dependency check.
Yeah.
How many charms do we have in OpenStack?
7? Maybe?
Yeah.
Maybe 7.
And that's due to change because we're going to do some refactoring on it.
You only do the
And it
graph to
will-
depth 1 though. I mean, and
Well, no,
of course
but
the
you can't.
depth is for the
But as we said, you
can't do that
can't,
one.
Can we not
You've
just
got to
have
go
just
down
a
to
service
basic
might not be
way of
actually
describing
functional, so then
what
it's fine.
charms in
And that's okay. We're going to instantiate the dependencies of the N-1 layer, but
Short of having stacks, which we haven't got, we're not going to get this release cycle, which would encapsulate metadata about which charms are involved in it. Can we just not agree to have some way of describing it in a very basic form so that that can be interrogated? If one of those is a merge proposal against one of those charms, then that stack is
First one, it's simple. Solving problem.
it will work this release. It's not long term.
so we're saying hard code the names.
I'm just saying that when you define what we're calling a stack test now, I think,
Yeah.
is there is a standardized way of describing which charms you're going to be using.
In the stack, effectively, when we have them, that will be replaced as
Yeah,
well.
exactly. So we can replace that. But I think for the time being, we need some way of describing that. Then we can do. We're getting down to implementation details.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
the requirement is we need
Yeah.
some way of knowing which charms trigger which stack test. So
Right,
we
that
can
sounds
figure
like
out the
really
detail.
good.
Yeah.
I'm still very excited about the idea of being able to dynamically test against all the members of the interface.
Yeah.
I think it's very doable.
Agreed that it is an explosion too. There, especially with some interfaces, we just
We just can't do
Possibility.
it. We just can't do it. It's very easy, like 10 times 10, 100. Put a few more,
one charm.
1,000. It's like, doesn't work.
Yeah,
But I think the requirement is.
we can turn it on.
We have a way
Well,
to.
we'd have to blacklist certain interfaces like HTTP.
Yeah, that's what told
Yeah, but
me.
it's, again,
So charm test stack scripts that also specify the component charms.
Yeah. So when we pull one of those in, we know
Yeah.
how to trigger it.
And we just deal with the fact that one failing test.
Which tells us really what we're interested in guessing about a stack.
Did you speak up?
The stacks have their exposed information right in them. We know the entry point into the stack, so we really know what we're interested in verifying.
And even in this case, it will, Juju expose in the stack, the shell script that we're calling a
Right.
stack is effectively the same thing.
Yeah.
So we have just about 10 minutes, and I'd like to get action items, and we don't have to assign them to people, but
Yeah, we do.
we need
Or assign them to the team, or assign them to the
They
team
need to
at
be
least
on
so they show
teams.
up on the work
No,
trial.
they're going to be on teams.
Cool,
I'm-
cool.
I'm saying you don't have to volunteer to do it. Don't worry about raising and saying this needs to get done. But we have a lot of requirements there, and I don't think they're all work items. They're just requirements. So let's take a first step towards getting to these requirements in this cycle. We absolutely have to be able to qualify charms in some way, and this is one way we'd like to do it. It runs and it passes its tests.
I have a generic requirements in mind that I'd appreciate if whoever gets to think about a problem kept in mind, which is, let's keep it simple.
Yeah.
Well, it's very easy.
Can we put that in the
Juju is very
default?
exciting. It's very easy to do a
template?
lot of tricky things. Let's keep it simple. Let's make it understandable.
Can we put that in the default Etherpad template, actually?
Yeah,
Just
right.
like requirement one of all sessions, keep it simple? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, given that, I'm going to actually delete the,
Keep it LTSable, I think, is something I would say.
yeah, keep it doable in the next 3-4 months. So we have something.
No.
Yeah, it died. It was a nice, fun little bike shredding session we had. Forget we ever showed you that, please.
Well, there's still a big hole between what we were talking about and it's how do we actually test, so setting up the stack is one thing, but now what are you actually testing? What determines an actual failure besides one of those steps failing? Okay, that's obvious. But now, is this a Selenium thing? What
I
are you
think
using
that's-
for? I know it's specific to the charm,
Each
but
test
Yep.
defines what it's testing.
So
But
for
we're-
OpenStack, we're looking for a test that we can run against that when it's deployed and know it's working. Details.
I imagine
So he
that-
launches an instance and verifies that the
And other
instance.
stuff like with, yeah.
but in an automated way.
Yes,
It's a
absolutely.
pain in the ass.
So,
OpenStack actually enables that in that particular case. I don't know how viable it is to others, but
action item. Action items. I think we need, the formal spec is always applied, I think, with the blueprint. And action items will come out of that. I want to know, what do we know that we need to do right now? There will be more work items to this blueprint if it's approved. I guarantee we're not going to identify everything to get this done. And I'm sure we'll say, well, these requirements we'll get this time, and the next time we'll discuss the other ones.
So we need a test runner, we need a way of spelling tests and capturing logs.
We need specification.
We need spec, yeah. That's, because we're, yeah.
You can put my name there. I'll either do it or I'll find someone to do it.
Okay, so I'll just send it directly to you.
Yeah.
This overlay pad.
Nice and simple spec. Do we have any time constraints on this? I think we can keep working on this and enriching it right up until the release of 12.04. So this isn't one that's subject
As soon as
to
possible, I think. We already have the official test runner is already,
test runner. Yeah, I'm not worried about.
it's it's working, right?
Right, but we want to
Place to
incorporate
put
this
them?
into the charm list.
Yeah,
So
we have to-
having the spec at least.
So I have a
what-
specific objective to get automated OpenStack testing running early this cycle.
Okay.
So that as soon as we're proposing changes back into Ubuntu, we know they're good before they land. That kicks in after Alpha 1. So I really need to have that done by then at the latest.
We want to,
By when is that?
Alpha 1, which
Oh,
is
for-
December. So
Alpha 1 is always way too soon after UDS, but it has to be.
But that's when we're bringing in the assurance velocity development stuff for this cycle. So that has to happen. Now I might have to put something stopgap in if we haven't got a final solution, but hopefully that will help drive us quite more clarification on what
Yeah.
we're doing.
so that's that you need to have some known way of spelling and writing tests, but not necessarily that we have an automated test runner running.
I will just,
Or you want both? Well, obviously everyone wants it.
I don't need a final solution by Apple, but I need something that at least gives us a handle on quality. I've got something that can deliver that at the moment,
This one,
but I
this
don't
is-
believe it's the final solution.
We might, I mean, we could probably have some as a manual test runner, effectively, like, against you personally or someone running the test, but not the automatic, pull, chain, waterfall thing, but running the F test that we spec'd out seems reasonable.
I'm concerned that just make a spec is a little bit outside of our normal processes. I didn't expect that anybody other than server team would actually do this. Like myself and working with James and others would be actually working on this. I don't expect the Juju team to implement most of this, more of a support role. So typically a spec isn't enough to get approval. It typically needs to come with an estimation of work. That's what we try to get to, not necessarily here, but
So what I propose is just to write a spec so that we can estimate the work.
okay. Just making sure.
We're done.
Yeah, though.
Right, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Before we do that, I wanted to mention something. In landscape, we started using a library called Rollout, which is a Python library for functional testing. And
So like a mechanized sort of web browser emulator?
no, it's not. It defines so it's a test runner first, and then it defines documents which are a succession of keywords. And keyword is the Python module that do stuff. So you can have actions or assertions.
So
That can be as much as start,
There's-
instance, or
I'm concerned. One of the things that we've really done with Charms is sold you write it in whatever you want. We don't want to start selling, but the tests you have to use our shit. Like, as much as we could write an awesome set of functional tests with an awesome functional test tool, and we should, we need to make it clear that you can write it like the shell script that we saw before. So I'm hesitant to get too far deep into.
I think that'll be a best practice thing. That'll be like, my charm is really, really great because I used all these tools and
Because I
stuff.
use the functional test.
Yeah, so like I prototyped in this bash script to get it working, and then later on, a year later when I started, it's fine.
I mean, Cucumber to me looks like an awesome.
This is cucumber looked like the coolest.
How are we
thing.
working?
I
don't even believe it works.
Effectively, each shell script is a separate
It's like,
test.
But this,
it's like
the
it's a way.
shell script
It's
is
nice.
it's a it's running every commit. It's running.
Right, so the thing,
The failure modes
I've
are
seen it
just
used
the
for
output
REST
effectively the shell script.
URLs.
I mean,
and then you do
With
like
regex.
Juju,
Like that
destroy
discovery we were
it,
talking about before.
yeah, the test runner.
I'm
the
dubious
kills it.
that you're thinking there. Actually, but
We should
yeah,
probably remove bootstrap and destroy environment from the responsibility of the test as well. So
Yes.
that's a
obviously
fixture.
something, but
I think
Set up
that's
the
part of the fixture, like the actual test.
That would be good. Do we need to,
Part of me thinks that
if we're going to integrate these into
ID.
a CI environment of some description, we probably need to specify for Charms writing these things, if they're going to generate test results as part of running their test feed against their Charms. what format they have to be in. so
Exit
that
code
they-
1 or 0.
Yeah. What else can we do?
It's the lingua franca.
There's some more to it than
Or
that. If
zero or
you want to
not.
go down the road, you can get some better benefit. So in particular, if you throw out the G and XML output, you can have something like Jenkins automatically give you a nice trend over time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's an equivalent for waterfall, I just don't know.
I would like to see it be a very binary.
Yep.
Well, I mean, zero,
But
zero and not
zero, one
zero.
can be
Artifacts.
translated into.
Not 1, but not 0.
We can translate that into JUnit XML, or, I mean, we can also introduce additional CLI APIs solely geared around testing, like, this failed because of this.
So it sounds like we need something that defines what we can accept if we're going to put that in framework. You see what I mean? So.
I think that'll be part of the spec, actually.
Yeah, it'll be
Because
like,
different-
here's how to
different
write
projects.
it.
I mean, I may pick up an OpenStack integration test, well, functional test project. That may do something. I don't know if it's over that, but that's.
I would hope the spec would define the requirements for each test.
Okay.
What it needs to do.
Or add that in.
And it would be
the IRE code.
Yeah, it's really.
Sounds good.
That's true. Almost deliberately designed so that you can just write stuff and choose shelters.
It's all.
Wow, what a mad scientist did that. Oh, that sounds about his speed.
You talk about
Several years ago.
Yeah, I use that a lot. So.
And you can have arbitrary minor stuff that's basically really handy for getting extracting data out.
A little bit, sir. Do kickboxing or not do kickboxing? Stupid question.
The magic creator is dead. No, it's not. It's sleeping. It's sleeping.